we move on to the paper by Sri Arvind ji on Ramayana, environmentalist aspects in Ramayana. Actually, ecology in Ramayana has been covered by many papers earlier, but this paper talks about how it has instructions for sustainable sustenance of environment and ecology. Sri Arvind ji.
Om Tat Sat. In the Vālmīki Rāmāyaṇa, when we get to 1/3 of the Ayodhya Kanda itself, Rama has already left for the forests with Sita and Lakshmana. And there, they must survive dangers in the wilderness and overcome them. But at the same time, through their immense virtue, they also cherish the forests as sacred ground with its natural beauty and as a means of human goodness. So this paper, whose first page you see on screen, tries to take the epitomes of natural living, simple living in terms of care for the environment that the characters of the epic exemplify. And this is in the context of some contemporary literature, of which I have just shown two book covers over here. The first one that you see on top is about urban ecosystems in India, and it does acknowledge peripherally some cultural aspects where traditional Indic approaches could help in, but it's peripheral. The second, of course, is a cover very familiar to all of us. And here too, the natural environment, the forests have slid to the background, and they are not always foregrounded in either televised portrayals of the epic or even in some more traditional discourses. So here, this paper attempts to mainstream and foreground both the cultural aspects of the epic, which can inspire better living today, as well as the forests in the Ramayana itself. So here, this is how the presentation will be organized. And this is the format for the slides from now on. In the concrete steel gray is the view from modernity and the current assessments of the ecological crisis. In the earthy brown are the source verses from the Ramayana themselves. And in the colors of India, of our nature and culture, we'll find the way forward. I'll be citing a few verses with the scheme of Kanda, Sarga, Shloka. Just a few examples which are particularly vivid. Sustainability, as we have seen, is a buzzword currently, but it's mostly subordinated to sustaining a level of consumption or a standard of living. And efforts towards sustainability have always been prompted by some catastrophe or crisis of ecological collapse. We heard Dr. Prasanna Kumarji talking of how it was a Bhopal crisis that really furthered environmental regulations in India. And all these, for addressing the current environmental crisis, the dominant view seems to be that whatever an Indic approach from epics can say lacks realism and is pre-enlightenment and is hence dismissed. However, if we go back to the epics, we see sustainability not prompted by a collapse or crisis, but emerging joyfully in an harmonious natural environment as a byproduct of reverence without being a forced addition to a lifestyle. So here, in this presentation, we will see how Ramayana uncannily seems to presage ideas which are called contemporary, like greening, sustainability, permaculture, ecoliteracy, and deep ecology. Those of us in Indian metros have heard about how our cities are graying in terms of becoming concrete jungles and lacking green cover. And even outside of the cities, there is much concern about how habitats are being fragmented, and how many of our keystone species are not able to find suitable wildlife corridors. And always infrastructure development is being pitted against the green cover. In contrast, the Ayodhya of the Ramayana is studded with gardens. Lakshmana, to the hunter chief Guha, proudly describes his capital city saying, Aramodhyana Sampurnam Samajotsava Shalinim Sukhita Vicherishyanti Rajadhanim Piturmama. There are aramas as well as udyanas, suggesting that these are places for sitting and relaxing as well as moving around joyfully. And these are also sites of festivity. And this is being acknowledged by current ecosystem activists, saying that green cover in cities also serves cultural functions. And it's not just about cities. We also hear this account of Bharata traveling urgently from Kekya to Koshala, finding a number of green spots where he can find rest. The very idea that of the Ashwamedha Yajna, when a free-ranging animal can traverse the entire landscape, suggests that corridors are present as a matter of course. One strikingly contemporary seeming instance we find in the portion where Bharata takes pretty much the whole of Ayodhya with him to visit Rama at Chitrakuta, is that when a grand road is laid from the city, there is also a tree plantation project that goes side by side. When it comes to sustainability, the modern view mostly articulates it in terms of consumption and how it should be regulated. When Kaikeyi in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, enjoins that Rama should go to the forest, it's not just the location and exile that she specifies, but also that he should adopt the lifestyle of a tapasa or a tapasvi. And a defining feature of tapas is bhoga sankocha, literally restraint in consumption. And the most ubiquitous image of it is that one who is living in tapas lives on fruits and roots, phala mula. And this is how Rama, Sita, Lakshmana are said to chiefly live on in the forest. However, it is chiefly and not exclusively. There is meat mentioned in terms of hunting and in ritual sacrifice. But here too, it's always circumscribed under the ethic of bhoga sankocha or restraint in consumption. And it's very reminiscent of the present day slogans of eat what you can cook or eat what you can kill in the limit. So whenever such a principle is adhered to, as the protagonists in the epic do, there is automatically a restraint in consumption as a matter of course. Similarly, the strict ritual regulations of sacrifice also mean that there is a check on any kind of excess. There is a passing image, but strikingly resembling in the epic, but it's strikingly resembling a current notion called permaculture, which is a vision of agriculture where farmland does not compete with forest land and doesn't require aggressive clearing. It's permanent in the sense that it's not about just one sowing to harvesting cropping cycle, but survives as long as the neighboring forests also do. And in the vicinity of Agastya's ashrama, we see this verse, Nivaran Panasans Talams, Timishan Vanchulan Dhawan, Chiribilvan Madhukamscha Bilvan Apicha Tindukan. So here, Nivaran, Panasan, and Talan, wild rice, jackfruit, and palm would be what we would consider food crops, and the rest are trees growing wild. And it's particularly interesting that a type of grain called Nivara, mentioned a lot in Indic corpus, is supposed to be a grain that grows wild with little need for cultivation. Definitely sounds interesting to current efforts towards agriculture that is lighter on the ecosystem. Ecoliteracy may be a new term since the 2000s, and like computer literacy, it's not just about terminology, but about about functional competence. In terms of easy familiarity and terminology, Rama and Lakshmana are so profuse in the sheer number of trees they are able to name in the forests during their exile. And in terms of functional competence, there is this striking image where Lakshmana is able to erect a cottage at such short notice. However, the notion of ecoliteracy now is more than just, say, being able to climb a tree or light a campfire. What if the tree is shedding leaves in the neighbor's compound wall? What if a seasonal festival comes up with a request to pluck flowers from it? And here is when it's not just knowledge of trees that is going to help, but also how to navigate human nature, the meeting with a committee, and and in resolving conflicts. And the traits for resolving demands from such disparate conflicting sources is something Rama is mentioned as having as early as the beginning of the Ayodhya Kanda, Shraishthyam Shastra Samuheshu Prapto Vyamishrakeshu cha Artha Dharmau cha Sangrihya Sukhatantro Nachalasa. So there's a mention of a Shastra Samuha, not just one discipline, but a variety of disciplines, which may be Vyamishraka, representing tensions like the ones between growth and ecology. And this needs to be resolved with due justice to both artha, prosperity, and dharma, righteousness. This seems like a verse worth framing and hanging in any place of policy influence. Finally, the ecology of the Ramayana is deep. Deep in the sense that it is not self-centered to the human species. The idea of the sacred has been extended to all beings. When Jatayu, during the first introduction to the Ramayana brothers, introduces himself, he speaks of the divine descent of all sentient beings. It's not just human beings, it's not an anthropocentric view, but one in which all beings share divine origins and are worthy of respect. Here is a verse from Mata Kaushalya's benedictory prayer before Rama leaves to the forest. Samitkusha pavitrani vedyaschayata cha sthandilani vichitrani shaila vriksha kshupa hrada patanga pannaga simha swam rakshantu narottama. Tellingly here, from Samit Kusha all the way till Sthandilani, these are sacred spaces in a formal Vedic context, but seamlessly along with them we have Shaila, the mountains, Vriksha, Kshupa, trees big and small, lakes, birds of the air, serpents, lions, and it is the propitiousness of all these beings that Mata Kaushalya wishes upon Rama. This itself may evoke the benediction that we heard at the beginning of this conference. There are a few policy suggestions inspired by the deep ecology of the Ramayana. About restoring the status of sthala vrikshas and the general pilgrim complexes. We hope to hear a lot more from speakers centered on these topics later in the conference. One suggestion which can turn the aesthetic appreciation of the epic into re-enchantment of the environment and greater environmental care would be Ramayana gardens. These can be spots where the trees mentioned in the Ramayana flourish, and this can be an ecological complement to the Ramayana circuit, which geographically traces the path of Rama. To conclude on an uplifting note of how the trio Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana survive and cherish the forests, which shines the light on what virtues equip them to do so. Here is just one verse I'll recite in conclusion. Aneka nana mrigapakshi sankule vichitra patras tabakair drumair yute vanotame vyala mruganu nadite tada vichahnu susukham jitendriya. Om Tat Sat. That I'll be glad to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Arvindji. I think all the audience have also realized how the wonderful ideas of sustainable development are embedded in our epics like Ramayana. There is a question in the question and answer box, Q&A box. If we, this is by Nilai Gadia. If we look at all the ancient texts, it was prior to the discovery of fossil fuels and use of equations of science for developing technology to increase efficiency of process. So how these old texts work for present times, when our main motive was reducing poverty to zero, whereas that time the poverty was not considered as a problem. Nilai, are you Nilai? Okay, Nilai. Nilai ji, let me answer this question. This whole reducing poverty kind of arguments came up only recently in the policy arguments of various states, including nation states. The early Enlightenment period and early emergence of science and technology did not have reduction of poverty as their goal. That's one clarification that you need. This whole reduction of poverty kind of arguments have come up after selling the Enlightenment arguments. The approach of selling the Enlightenment arguments after the population explosion analysis and all that. Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, actually, after environmentalist awareness, environmentalism has come into vogue, the whole world has realized that the worldview behind science and technology, there is a worldview. First of all, you have to recognize, Nilaji, that science and technology is not as objective as it is projected to be. Okay, and technology particularly, which is responsible for the crisis that we are talking about. Actually, technology is invented, science is discovered. Technology which is invented, invention always comes from necessity, and necessities are envisioned according to a certain eschatology, a certain worldview. So, culturally governed, culturally controlled technology has come up. So the present science and technology are culturally controlled and culturally originated. There is a culture behind it, and that culture has been anti-nature, bringing nature under control, exploiting nature. All this is well recognized in the entire environmentalist literature, Nilaji. And it was at that stage that they began to realize that an alternative worldview is required. An alternative worldview has to control the future science and technology. And they started realizing that such worldviews existed in nature-friendly cultures all over the world. All pagan cultures, all indigenous cultures, including Vedic culture and the Indian folk cultures, have been nature-friendly. And you have such a nature-friendly cultures all over the world, not just in India. And people began to realize that they need to go back to those to collect the worldviews. It is for collecting the worldviews that govern the future development of science and technology. So here we are not saying that how an eco-friendly aircraft is already designed somewhere. No, we are not saying that. How to evolve an eco-friendly aircraft needs an eco-friendly worldview to be applied to a future design of aircraft. Okay, so there are no exaggerated claims here that okay, whatever technology you have, I already had, but there was an eco-friendly technology. No, the argument here is that you need, as Dr. Prasanna Kumarji was saying, the future development goals, future development policies need a new environmental ethic to be behind. That environmental ethic is what is available in what Sri Arvindji was showing in Rāmāyaṇa, what Sri Meghji was showing in Mahabharata. It is that ethic that controls you. It is that ethic that brings a new environmentally friendly, nature friendly development and nature friendly science and technology. Nilaiji, we are not saying that these old texts already said whatever you have to say in future. No. Okay, thank you. Arvindji, please.
Yeah, the only thing I will add is that it's all the more remarkable that a lifestyle so compatible with current ecological concerns evolved even when there was not this dangling threat of ecological collapse. The situation described in the Ramayana is so idyllic, nature is plentiful and generous and not under a threat of collapse at all, and yet there is a lifestyle which is gentle on nature. It's not that it is a prodding of the of catastrophe that led to this. So it seems all the more remarkable that such a worldview emerged of its own accord from a place of abundance rather than threat.
Yeah. And there are a few more. Why India is suffering from all political and neighbors dharma. So this is not relevant for ecology, environmental studies. Timely interventions by both the presenters. It's time the Eurocentric narrative of sustainable development be challenged and an alternative be supplanted from the Indic tradition. Really, like the academic rigor of the papers, a need of the hour indeed. And there is another anonymous attendee. Thank you for the wonderful references. Other than the exiled Raghu duo, does Vālmīki provide any insight on how the indigenous forest dwellers regarded their ecosystem?
One, one, uh, uh, one example we saw here already was how wild rice seems to grow coexisting with the vegetation in the hermitages. There's also an instance where Rama himself offers to rid Sutikshna's hermitage of the predators to make life more convenient for the hermitage dwellers. And Sutikshna refuses. So there is this, there are repeated instances where the sages in the forest, the hermits in the forest, take pains to ensure that their tread is light and that the forest is not turned into a city. Like even when Bharata brings the entire retinue from Ayodhya to Chitrakuta, he's so careful to leave the bulk of the army outside someplace so that the sylvan environments are not disrupted. So it's not just the protagonists in the epic, but everyone else from other royals and also the people in the hermitages who are so caring of the environment. Matanga says that he has cared for the environment, cared for the forest like his son, and that is his. That's the impetus for his curse on Bali, who's more rough on the environment, just uproots trees for showing off his strength and seems to own the place. So the entire ethic in the epic is one of environmental care, and if whatever images are shown to be against this ethic are of characters who have departed long from the paths which the epic considers righteous. So yes, those are a few representative examples which I hope address the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Arvindji. Now